Diversity in the news media industry has been a brewing topic for decades. I can say from personal experience, my mother was a journalist for many, many years. She began her career in the late 1980s. And that having those conversations around the percentage of black people in a newsroom relative to the demographics of the cities that these newsrooms are in. So majority of black cities like Detroit, New Orleans, Richmond, Virginia. When you look at some of the newspapers and TV stations in some of these places, they tend to be majority white, with hardly any black people, and that's before you even get to other journalists of color. A lot of newsrooms, for example, struggled with incorporating Spanish-speaking journalists at a time when the country started seeing more immigrant populations come from Spanish-speaking countries, and you had no reporters on staff to communicate with them. Same with Asian immigration. Asians have always struggled to be integrated fully into newsrooms in places where you see lots of Asian residents. But speaking directly to black people, the industry has struggled and grappled with hiring, retaining, and promoting black journalists for many, many years now. Organizations like NABJ, the National Association of Black Journalists, were originally formed for this purpose. And for the years since, it seems like it's been an ongoing conversation to integrate newsrooms, but the actions taken have been slow in many newsrooms. Some newsrooms are better than others, and you see that in the breadth of coverage that they have for the cities that they serve. But a number of factors have led to why newsrooms are not as integrated as they should be. Chief among them, the internal bias that hiring editors may have. So you look at a lot of the larger newsrooms, we're talking your higher level USA Today, New York Times, Wall Street Journal, and the belief among hiring editors was if we get candidates who go to Ivy League schools or some of those higher up schools, or we recruit from the larger cities in the country, from some of the newspapers there, then we get the best of the best talent. Well, what obviously happens when you recruit from Ivy Leagues is that your candidate pool is a lot more white because Ivy League schools were not very diverse for a long time. Also, if you're recruiting from larger cities, it's typically more expensive to live in those cities, and black people on average, whether they're journalists or not, tend to have lower income. So then you can't always find black talent in larger cities because they can't afford to live there. So for many years, a lot of the larger newspapers did not bring in a lot of black talent because the pools that they were recruiting from were not very diverse. There's also a number of other things happen, including internal biases of not just where they recruit from, but who they're recruiting. Many times our media industry can be a little bit incestual in terms of if you get one editor from a certain school, they may hire people from who are very much like them, who also followed a similar career path, went to the same school, but again, they end up bringing in a lot of people that look like them, oftentimes white. Another thing that happened with the media industry is the economic challenges of the last decade plus. So, classified advertising has all but migrated online at this point. Classified sales were a huge revenue driver for newspapers, which in turn paid salaries. But as a lot of that stuff went online, the newspapers started to lose revenues, and they started to lay people off. Encourage long-standing employees to take buyouts. But what that also meant was not only were a lot of black journalists who were hired at up until that point, a lot of them were lost in that storm, but it also prevented, again, the hiring and retention of black journalists because there just wasn't enough money to hire journalists, period. You layer that on top of the recruitment strategies and whatnot, the few newsroom positions that remained open usually went to white candidates. Why is it important to have newsroom diversity? Some people might ask, a reporter just asks questions. They're just trying to get to the heart of a story. You just need to know how to write. When I'm reading a byline or something like that, I'm not looking at color. The reason why is because in the last segment, when we talked about the stereotypes that news media perpetrates in many cases, in cities where there are huge populations of color, huge populations of black people, you need people that reflect that community to accurately tell the stories of that community. When you have more black people in a newsroom, you have black people who can go into a black community, go into a black neighborhood, and you build that trust between the publication and the reader, that publication and the community, so those stories can be told accurately. It hurts the media industry when we don't have people reflective of the communities that they serve, because you're losing out on potential readers, you're losing the trust between the readers and the publication. So this is why we are constantly in our industry talking about media diversity, because it is paramount to our sustainability and our survival.